Hello everyone, Tom with Capo Fetish. Today on the channel, we're going to talk about highly acclaimed 1970s albums that never charted on the Billboard Top 200 in the US. I'm going to start off here, number one, with an album from 1970, the last album from the Velvet Underground, Loaded, featuring two bona fide rock and roll classics, Sweet Jane and Rock and Roll, which thousands of bands have covered over the years. It has a song in here called Who Loves the Sun that starts off the album, which is kind of like flirting with a little bit of sunshine pop. When I bought this album back in 1983, I think this was one of the only Velvet Underground albums that were in print at that time. And throughout 1983, the summer, as I graduated, I was just playing this nonstop. Love this album. There's just not a bad track on here. I think some of this stuff, too, kind of foreshadows the glam movement. You know, some of the guitar sounds and just the vibe. Songs like Sweet Jane, of course, and Cool It Down, and Train Round the Bend, Head Held High. And I've heard other people mention this album, even it's like 2 years ahead of the whole glam movement. So the Velvet Underground were always kind of ahead of their time and out of their time, but an album that never ever charted, but I still think is one of the great Velvet Underground albums. Over the years, I've never had like a favorite Velvet Underground album for a long period of time. It always varies. Sometimes I've gone through periods where I think this is the best album, then I think the third album from '69 is the best album, and the Banana album is the best album. So it just varies depending on mood and what period in my life I'm in. So anyway, Velvet Underground, Loaded from 1970. From 1971, highly acclaimed acoustic album here by folk artist Roy Harper, the album called Stormcock. Now, Jimmy Page was very influenced by Roy Harper. You can see it all over the Zeppelin III album. And even though this was released after Zeppelin III, this album really showcases Roy Harper's talents. There's 4 tracks on here, super long tracks. The second track, The Same Old Rock, features Jimmy Page on lead guitar. This is one of those albums that has to grow on you over time. It's like first listen, it's hard to kind of take it all in. These songs are very long, but over time, it's a great headphone listen, just a chill back, laid back album that really, over time, really reveals itself, and it's really, really, really cool. One of my favorites on here is Old Man Rock and Roll Band. Really, really cool track. But again, yeah, it's an album that you have to just kind of like take your time with. It's not one of those albums where you just immediately are like, wow, I'm sold. But over time, it's one of those albums that there's a lot of rewards to benefit from listening to this album. It's fantastic. So Roy Harper's Stormcock, and I think a lot of the influence from Jimmy Page was from his previous 4 or 5 albums. He released several albums before Stormcock, but this is his most highly acclaimed album from 1971, Roy Harper's Stormcock. A debut. This is a guy before he went all like completely, how would you say it, like idiosyncratic and unpredictable. He was just a songwriter from San Diego writing amazing tracks. I'm talking about Tom Waits, his first album, Closing Time, his first for the Asylum labels, record label. What is notable about this album is the song Old 55, which the Eagles covered, and I'm sure Tom Waits reaped the awards, the publishing rewards for that particular track. And there's so many beautiful tracks on here, like Rosie, Martha, Old Shoes, just really showcasing, I think, the peak of Tom Waits. This, along with The Heart of Saturday Night, I think shows the peak of Tom Waits as singer-songwriter before he became more kind of experimental with other albums like Blue Valentine and Swordfish Trombones. So a fantastic singer-songwriter album from 1973. Tom Waits' Closing Time. An album that was recorded in 71, recorded by John Cale, not released till 1976. Pretty much foreshadowed the new wave and punk era. Talking about the Modern Lovers debut. What an absolute perfect album this is. This is really different than what John Richmond would do later in his solo career. More kind of childlike, whimsy kind of tracks, which I love. I love like Abominable Snowman in the Market in New England. I love that period of John Richmond, but this is probably his more harder edged, if you could say that word, of his songwriting. Of course, including the classic Roadrunner, which many garage bands have covered. So many great tracks down the line. Astral Plane, Old World. Pablo Picasso was never called an asshole, not in New York. Pablo Picasso. I remember seeing David Bowie on his last tour at the Wiltern Theater do a cover of Pablo Picasso. I'm Straight, Dignified and Old. I love the lyrics on here. She Cracked, Hospital, Someone I Care About, Girlfriend, Modern World, and the original version of Government Center. He did a reworking of that, which later appeared on a Rhino compilation years later. But yeah, this is just an absolute 5-star classic here. The Modern Lovers from 1976, but the bulk of it recorded in 71, recorded by John Cale. Another great one from 74 is Richard and Linda Thompson's I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight from 1974. Just an incredible album here. Great songwriting, Linda Thompson's gorgeous voice. It's one of those albums that you have to be in a certain mood for, though. It's kind of melancholy. One of my favorite tracks on here is the title track, I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight. Other highlights for me, When I Get to the Border, The Great Valerio, We Sing Hallelujah. I mean, there's really not a bad track on here. Fantastic stuff for Richard Thompson and Linda Thompson. One of their albums, which one is it? That one, oh boy, I can't think of it. There's one that's really highly acclaimed. It was their last album. I can't think of it offhand, but no one really talks much about this one. They talk more about that particular album. And I can't think of it off the top of my head. Fill in the blanks in the comments section. You know what I'm talking about. But that particular album, I think, was released in 82. Shoot Out the Lights. That's what it is. Shoot Out the Lights. That one seems to get a lot more attention than this one, but I think this one is way better. I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight from Linda and Richard Thompson from 74. Now, no Nick Drake albums ever entered the top 200. He became kind of like popular with the Volkswagen commercial in 1999. So all three of his albums never charted, but this one I think really had the most potential as far as commercial success, if it had gotten the right exposure, which it did not at the time. And this is his debut, 5 Leaves Left. One of just, 3 masterpieces that he recorded along with Brighter Later and Pink Moon in his lifetime. This one does feature Richard Thompson on lead guitar on the first track, Time Has Told Me. Riverman is such a gorgeous track. This guy didn't even have the capability of writing a bad track. Every track he wrote on his 3 albums, and even his compilation album, Time Has Told Me, not Time Has Told Me, Time of No Reply, which came out later posthumously. The guy just was incapable of writing a bad tune. Riverman, 3 Hours, Way to Blue, Day Is Done, Cello Song, The Thoughts of Mary Jane, Man in Shed, Fruit Tree, and Saturday Sun. 10 just absolutely gorgeous tracks. Amazing arrangements, his voice, his guitar playing. There's really nobody like Nick Drake. His music just takes you somewhere really amazing. Sometimes it's melancholy, sometimes it's uplifting. Either way, he's just one of the great all-time singer-songwriters of all time. I'm really glad that he's finally gotten his due over the past quarter century, because these albums need to be played and discovered. I mean, they will change your life. So 5 Leaves Left, I'm highlighting in this video today. This was his first album, his debut from 1969. We got to throw this one. I was really surprised to see this one never even hit the top 200 in the Billboard US charts. And it's one of the most influential albums of the rock era, and it's television's Marquee Moon. I've talked a lot about this album, which I won't go into great detail. I've talked about it a lot over the past couple of years, but I mean, just an absolute perfect record, a groundbreaking album. The guitar playing between Richard Lloyd and Tom Verlaine is just something very special. It's not just noodling and endless jamming. It's very, very melodic and complex, and has a purpose. Especially on the title track, Marquee Moon. That song is just one of the most amazing long songs ever recorded. See No Evil, which a lot of people have covered. I saw R.E.M. do it live once. Venus and Friction, Elevation. One of my favorite tracks, along with the title track, though, is Guiding Light. What a gorgeous track. The way it builds up, and the guitar lead melody is absolutely amazing. Prove It, and that last track, Torn Curtain. So yeah, just another highly influential, highly acclaimed album that never hit the top 200. Television, Marquee Moon from 1977. John Cale's Paris 1919 from 1973, another highly acclaimed album that never really went anywhere. And I don't know a lot of the John Cale solo discography. The handful I've heard, this one seems to be the most accessible. I love the first side of this album, Child's Christmas in Wales, Hanky Panky Now How, The Endless Plane of Fortune, Andalusia, Macbeth. I love that first side. The second side I'm not as into as the first side, but I think this is his most accessible album, released on Reprise Records in 1973. John Cale's Paris 1919. Just like Nick Drake, none of Big Star's albums ever hit the top 200. And this one I'm holding up because this should have been a top 10 album if it had been distributed in the right way, if the record company hadn't been like on the outs, Ardent Records. This album should have been a top 10. I mean, there's so many absolute radio songs all over this album. Big Star's first album, #1 record. It is cool that the song In the Street was used for That 70's Show, retooled by Cheap Trick with different lyrics, but still the same song. So it's cool that, you know, later on it became kind of famous. The Ballad of El Gudo, written by Alex Chilton, is just an incredible track. You have other songs on here like 13, which a lot of indie bands have covered, this acoustic track by Alex Chilton. Songs like When My Baby's Beside Me should have been airplay. Should have been airplay back in the early 70s. My Life Is Right, Give Me Another Chance. I mean, this is just an absolute 5-star album. I mean, there's nothing underground sounding about it. It's very accessible. It's very commercial sounding, and the title is very ironic. #1 record. Anything but a #1 record, but an absolute flawless masterpiece from 1972 that never charted, along with Radio City and Big Star Third. So #1 record. If you've never heard it, check it out. You'll love it on first listen. It's that infectious and accessible. So Big Star, #1 record from 1972. An album called White Light, but I never knew it was called that. When I've owned this copy, I've only just known it as Gene Clark. This is the album that's known as White Light. Here's another album that should have had more exposure. So many great tracks on here. The Virgin, Because of You, the title track, White Light, Spanish Guitar. He does a version of Tears of Rage by Richard Manuel and Bob Dylan. I think this is his best album. A lot of people praise No Other. I never could get into that album for some reason. I tried and tried. I just could not get into it. This one, on first listen, when I bought this years ago, loved it at first. And I think Gene Clark is just, you know, I won't call him underrated. He's become very praised over time. But man, the guy really has some songwriting chops. Throughout the Byrds, his solo career, just an amazing artist. We lost him too early. I think we lost him in like 91. So again, Gene Clark from 1971, the album called White Light, but on this particular edition, it's just called Gene Clark. So another one too, considered probably the blueprint of 1970s punk, released 7 years before the scene exploded in England and before the Ramones in 75, 76. To me, this is the greatest punk album of all time. Hands down, it's real, it's authentic, it's balls to the wall, it's demented, it's the best. The Stooges Fun House, come on, this is the real deal here, you know? When you look at bands like Green Day, who are pretending to be punk, and other bands of that nature, you just look at this and go, I mean, this is the real deal right here. Fun House by the Stooges, every track, amazing. Down on the Street, Loose, TVI. I love the slow kind of dirge of Dirt and that really cool wah-wah guitar by Ron Ashton. Second side is just absolute just chaos, just fantastic chaos with 1970 and that sax solo by Steve McKay. Funhouse is loose, kind of like a loose James Brown track, if you can say that. And then LA Blue is just absolutely just killing it with some free-form noise. So yeah, another one, probably one of the most acclaimed albums of all time right here. Funhouse by the Stooges from 1970. If you have any more highly acclaimed albums from the 1970s you'd like to throw into the comment section, please do. As always, thanks for watching. If you dig the content across this channel, please press subscribe. I'd appreciate it. It costs nothing. And we will see you soon. You all take care. Bye-bye.